The scent of cinnamon and pine needles filled Mom's living room as I carefully arranged the last ornament on her vintage Christmas tree. December had always been my favorite month, but this year felt different. Special. In 3 weeks, I'd be walking down the aisle to marry David Chen, the man who'd turned my world upside down in the most beautiful way possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Evelyn, honey, could you help me with something? Mom's voice drifted from the hallway, accompanied by the sound of boxes being shuffled around. I found her in the storage closet, wrestling with a large cardboard box that had seen better decades. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light streaming through the nearby window as she pulled it free from its hiding place behind winter coats and forgotten board games. What's all this? I asked, reaching out to steady the box as she carried it toward the living room. Old photographs, she said, her eyes twinkling with the kind of mischief that usually preceded embarrassing childhood stories. I thought it might be nice to put together a little display for the wedding. You know, show David what he's getting himself into. I groaned playfully. Mom, please tell me you're not planning to include the one of me with chocolate cake smeared all over my face from my 4th birthday. Oh, that one's definitely making the cut, she laughed, settling the box on the coffee table. But there are others too. Family history, your grandparents, some pictures from when you were born. David appeared in the doorway, shaking snow from his dark hair. He'd been outside helping Dad fix the loose shutter that had been rattling in the December wind. His cheeks were flushed red from the cold, and his eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled at us. What are you two conspirators up to now? He asked, unwinding his scarf and hanging it over the back of a chair. Mom's threatening to embarrass me with baby pictures, I said, making room for him on the couch beside me. I love baby pictures, David said, settling in close enough that I could feel the lingering chill from outside on his clothes. Especially embarrassing ones. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Traitor, I muttered, but I was smiling as I leaned into his warmth. Mom began pulling out photo albums, loose pictures, and yellowed newspaper clippings. The box seemed to contain decades of family memories, all jumbled together without any particular organization. There were pictures of my parents' wedding, my first steps, family vacations, Christmas mornings, graduations, a lifetime of moments captured and preserved. Oh, this is precious, Mom said, holding up a photo of me at age 6, missing my 2 front teeth and grinning widely at the camera. You were so proud of losing those teeth. David chuckled, taking the photo from her hands. You were adorable. Still are, actually. I felt my cheeks warm as he pressed a kiss to my temple. Even after 2 years together, he still made my heart skip like a teenager with a crush. Here's one of your grandmother, Mom continued, pulling out a black and white photograph. This was taken right before she met your grandfather. She was working as a nurse during the war. I studied the photo with interest. Grandmother Catherine had died when I was 12, but I still remembered her stories about working in field hospitals, caring for wounded soldiers with limited supplies and unlimited compassion. In the picture, she looked impossibly young and beautiful, her dark hair pinned back in victory rolls, her uniform crisp and white. She was stunning, David said softly, leaning over to get a better look. She really was, Mom agreed. And tough as nails. She once told me she delivered 3 babies during an air raid, never missing a beat even with bombs falling around them. We continued through the photographs, each one sparking a story or memory. There were pictures of family reunions, holiday gatherings, birthday parties, and quiet everyday moments that had somehow seemed important enough to preserve. Mom narrated each photo with the kind of detail that only comes from living through the moments they captured. Oh, now this is interesting, she said, pulling out a manila envelope from the bottom of the box. I'd forgotten about these. She opened the envelope carefully, as if the contents might crumble at her touch. Inside were several very old photographs, some dating back to what looked like the 1940s. The paper was yellowed and fragile, the corners soft with age. These belonged to your grandmother, Mom explained. I found them when we cleaned out her house after she passed. She never talked much about her family before the war. The first photograph showed a group of young people standing in front of what looked like a train station. They were dressed in the fashion of the 1940s, the women in carefully tailored coats and hats, the men in suits and overcoats. Everyone was smiling, but there was something bittersweet about their expressions, as if they knew they were capturing something that might not last. "Do you know who they are?" I asked, studying the faces carefully. "Some of them," Mom said. "That's your grandmother there, second from the left. And I think that might be her sister Rose, but I'm not entirely sure." David had gone very still beside me. I glanced at him, expecting to see the polite interest he usually showed when Mom launched into family history, but instead his face had gone pale. His eyes were fixed on the photograph with an intensity that made my stomach flutter with unease. "David? You okay?" He didn't respond immediately. His hands, which had been warm and relaxed moments before, had begun to tremble slightly. When he finally looked up from the photograph, his expression was one of complete bewilderment. "Where?" he began, then stopped, swallowing hard. "Where did you say this was taken?" "I'm not entirely sure," Mom replied, noting his strange reaction with obvious concern. "Somewhere in California, I think. Your grandmother moved there from the East Coast sometime during the war." David's face had gone from pale to ashen. He reached for the photograph with hands that were definitely shaking now, holding it closer to his face as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "This can't be right," he whispered, more to himself than to us. "David, what's wrong?" I asked, genuine worry creeping into my voice. "You're scaring me." He looked up at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before, a mixture of confusion, fear, and something else I couldn't identify. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Don't you see it?" he said, his eyes darting between the photograph and my face. "Don't you see it, Evelyn?" "See what?" I took the photograph from his trembling hands, studying it more carefully. "David, I don't understand what you're talking about." But even as I said it, something cold began to settle in my stomach. Because now that I was looking more closely, now that David had pointed it out, there was something strange about one of the faces in the photograph. Something that made my breath catch in my throat. The young man standing at the far right of the group, the one with dark hair and kind eyes, the one whose arm was casually draped around a pretty blonde woman's shoulders, he looked exactly like David, not similar, not reminiscent. Exactly like him. The photograph slipped from my nerveless fingers, fluttering to the floor like a fallen leaf. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the steady tick of Mom's antique clock and the soft whisper of snow against the windows. "That's impossible," I heard myself say, though my voice sounded strange and far away. "That picture was taken 70 years ago." David bent to retrieve the photograph, his movements slow and careful, as if he were afraid it might disappear if he moved too quickly. When he straightened, he was staring at the image again, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. "I know," he said quietly. "But that's definitely me." Mom leaned forward, taking the photograph from David's hands and studying it with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Her face was troubled, lines of concentration creasing her forehead as she looked back and forth between the picture and David's face. "It's an incredible resemblance," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. "People say everyone has a doppelganger somewhere in the world." "Look at his eyes," David interrupted, his voice urgent now. "Look at the scar on his chin. Look at the way he's standing." I did look, and my heart began to pound. The young man in the photograph didn't just look like David, he had the same small scar on his chin that David had gotten falling off his bike when he was 8. The same slightly crooked way of smiling. The same habit of standing with his weight shifted to his left foot. "This is insane," I whispered. "People don't just appear in photographs from 70 years ago." "Maybe it's his grandfather," Mom suggested, though she didn't sound convinced by her own words. "Or great-grandfather. Sometimes genetic traits skip generations and then resurface." David shook his head slowly. "I would know if I had family who looked exactly like me. My parents documented everything about our family history when I was growing up. We don't have any relatives who emigrated to California during the war." The three of us sat in stunned silence, staring at the photograph as if it might suddenly reveal its secrets. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance, Christmas music played softly from a neighbor's house. The normalcy of it all felt surreal, given the impossibility of what we were looking at. There has to be an explanation, I said finally, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince them or myself. Things like this don't just happen. Don't they? David asked quietly. He was still staring at the photograph, but now his expression had shifted from shock to something deeper, something that looked almost like recognition. What if they do happen? What if there are things in this world that we don't understand? David, you're starting to sound like you believe in time travel or something equally ridiculous, I said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. I don't know what I believe anymore, he replied, his voice distant. But I know what I'm looking at. And I know it's impossible. Mom had been quiet during our exchange, continuing to study the photograph with the intensity of a detective examining evidence. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful and troubled. There might be someone who could help us figure this out, she said slowly. Your grandmother had a friend, Mrs. Chen, who lived in the same nursing home. They spent hours talking about the old days. She might remember something about this photograph, or about the people in it. I felt David stiffen beside me at the mention of the name Chen. It was his surname, of course, but hearing it in connection with my grandmother's friend sent another chill down my spine. Mrs. Chen? David repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes. Lovely woman. Chinese American, about your grandmother's age. She passed away about 5 years ago, but she had children who might remember their mother's stories. David set the photograph down on the coffee table with exaggerated care, as if it were made of the most delicate glass. When he looked up at me, his eyes were wide with something that might have been fear. Evelyn, he said slowly, my grandmother's name was Chen. She died 5 years ago. The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what he'd just said. The coincidences were piling up too quickly, each one more impossible than the last. I began, then stopped, because I didn't know how to finish the sentence. Impossible? Unbelievable? Terrifying? There has to be more than one Mrs. Chen, Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's not an uncommon name. How many Mrs. Chens do you think lived in Riverside Manor nursing home 5 years ago? David asked quietly. How many of them would have been the right age to be friends with Evelyn's grandmother? I felt the world tilting around me, as if the solid ground beneath my feet had suddenly become uncertain. The photograph lay on the coffee table between us, innocent and damning at the same time. This is crazy, I said, standing up abruptly and beginning to pace around the living room. People don't just appear in photographs from 70 years ago. Dead grandmothers don't turn out to be friends. Fiancés don't have identical twins living in the past. Evelyn, David said gently, sit down. Please. I don't want to sit down, I replied, my voice rising slightly. I want this to make sense. I want there to be a logical explanation for what we're looking at. So do I, David said. But wanting something doesn't make it true. I stopped pacing and looked at him, really looked at him. The man I was supposed to marry in 3 weeks, the man I thought I knew better than anyone in the world, was studying a 70-year-old photograph as if it held the answers to questions I didn't even know how to ask. What are you thinking? I asked, dreading the answer. I'm thinking, David said slowly, that we need to find out more about this photograph. About when it was taken, where it was taken, who these people are. And what if we don't like what we find out? He met my eyes. And in them I saw the same fear that was growing in my own chest. Then we deal with it, he said simply. Together. I looked at the photograph again, at the young man who looked exactly like my fiancé standing beside a group of people from another era. The rational part of my mind insisted that there had to be an explanation, that the universe simply didn't work the way this photograph suggested it might, but the other part of my mind, the part that had always believed in magic and mystery and the possibility that some questions might not have answers, whispered that maybe the rational part was wrong. Okay, I said finally, sinking back down onto the couch beside David. Where do we start? Mom reached for the manila envelope, carefully examining it for any clues about its contents. There might be more photographs in here, she said. Or maybe something written on the back of this one. She turned the photograph over, and we all leaned forward eagerly. In faded pencil, someone had written, California, June 1943. Last day before we all go our separate ways. May we find each other again someday. The words sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the December weather outside. I looked at David, and saw my own unease reflected in his face. "May we find each other again someday," he repeated softly. "What do you think that means?" Before I could answer, Mom pulled another photograph from the envelope. This one was smaller, more intimate. It showed just two people, the young man who looked like David, and a woman with dark hair and familiar eyes. A woman who looked exactly like me. The photograph slipped from Mom's fingers and fluttered to the floor for the second time that afternoon. This time, none of us moved to pick it up. "Oh my God," I whispered, staring down at my own face looking back at me from 1943. "What is happening to us?" The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest pressure. I stared down at the second photograph lying on Mom's hardwood floor, my own face gazing back at me from 7 decades in the past. The woman in the picture wore a simple 1940s dress with a small floral pattern, her hair styled in soft waves that framed her face. But it was undeniably me, same green eyes, same slightly upturned nose, same dimple in my left cheek that only appeared when I smiled. "This isn't possible," I said for what felt like the 100th time, but the words had lost all meaning. They were just sounds now, a mantra against the impossible. David knelt down and picked up the photograph with reverence, as if it were a religious artifact. His hands had stopped shaking, replaced by an eerie calm that somehow frightened me more than his earlier panic. "Look at her dress," he said quietly. "Look at the way she's standing. The way she's looking at him." I forced myself to study the image more carefully. The woman, me, was standing close to the man who looked like David, her hand resting lightly on his arm. There was an intimacy to the pose, a familiarity that spoke of deep affection. "They look like they were in love." "They look happy," Mom observed, her voice barely above a whisper. "They look like us," David corrected. "They look exactly like us." I stood up abruptly, needing to move, needing to do something other than sit and stare at the impossible. There has to be a rational explanation. Maybe it's some kind of elaborate hoax. Maybe someone doctored these photographs. "With what technology?" David asked, still studying the picture. "These are genuine vintage photographs, Evelyn. Look at the paper, the way the images have aged. You can't fake 70 years of deterioration." Mom had been quiet, but now she reached into the manila envelope again. "There's more," she said, her voice hollow. She pulled out a small bundle of what looked like letters, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. "What are those?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "I'm not sure." Mom's fingers trembled as she untied the ribbon. They were with the photographs. The letters were written on yellowed stationery, the ink faded but still legible. Mom opened the first one carefully, her eyes scanning the contents. As she read, her face grew increasingly pale. "What does it say?" David asked. Mom cleared her throat and began to read in a shaky voice. "My dearest Catherine, I hope this letter finds you well, wherever the war may have taken you. I think of our last day together often, when we all promised to find each other again someday. Do you remember what David said? That love transcends time itself? I used to think he was being romantic, but now I wonder if he knew something we didn't. The dreams have been getting stronger. Every night, I see faces I've never seen before, but somehow I know them. A woman with kind eyes who might be my daughter, a man with gentle hands who could be my grandson. Sometimes I dream of a different time, a different world, where Christmas trees are lit with electric lights instead of candles, where people carry tiny telephones in their pockets, where the war is just a memory in history books. I know you'll think I'm going mad, but I have to tell someone. Yesterday, I went to the pier where we used to meet, and I swear I saw them, the people from my dreams. They looked right through me, as if I were the ghost. Maybe I am. Write to me soon, dear friend. I need to know I'm not losing my mind. All my love, Elena." The letter fluttered from Mom's hands as if it had burned her. We all stared at it lying on the coffee table, another piece of an impossible puzzle. "Elena," I whispered. That's my middle name." "The woman in the photograph," David said slowly. "The one who looks like you. Her name was Elena." I felt the room spinning around me. How could my grandmother know someone named Elena who looked exactly like me and was in love with someone who looked exactly like you? "Maybe she didn't just know her," David said quietly. "Maybe she was her." "That's insane," I protested, but even as I said it, pieces were clicking together in my mind. My grandmother had always been secretive about her past before the war. She'd claimed her family died in Europe, that she'd come to America as a refugee, but she'd never provided details. And she'd always seemed strangely familiar with things she should never have experienced. Mom picked up another letter from the bundle, this one addressed to Elena in different handwriting. The envelope was postmarked from San Francisco, June 1943. "This one's from David," she said, looking at my fiancé with an expression I couldn't read. "I mean, from someone named David." David held out his hand for the letter, but Mom hesitated. "Are you sure you want to read this?" "I have to," he said simply. Mom handed him the letter, and he opened it with the same careful reverence he'd shown the photographs. As he read silently, I watched emotions play across his face: confusion, wonder, fear, and something that looked like recognition. "Read it aloud," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. David looked up at me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Are you sure?" I nodded, settling back down on the couch beside him. Whatever this was, whatever was happening to us, we needed to face it together. David cleared his throat and began to read. "My beloved Elena, by the time you receive this letter, I'll be gone. The ship leaves tonight, and I still don't know where they're sending us. Part of me hopes I'll never see another battlefield, but part of me knows that this war is bigger than any of us understand. You asked me yesterday if I believe in fate, if I think we were meant to find each other. I've been thinking about that ever since. There's something I never told you, something I was afraid you'd think was madness. Sometimes, when I hold you, I remember things that haven't happened yet. I see us in a different time, a different world. I see a Christmas tree covered in lights that shine without flame, and snow falling outside windows that don't let in the cold. I see us older, different faces but the same souls, promising to love each other forever in front of people who love us both. I know it sounds impossible, but I think we've done this before, Elena. I think we've found each other across time, across lives, across whatever barriers exist between one world and the next. And I think we'll do it again. If something happens to me in this war, if I don't make it back, don't mourn for too long. Look for me in the next life, in the next time. I'll be waiting for you there, probably wondering why it took you so long to find me. And if by some miracle we both survive this war, if we both make it through to whatever comes next, remember this moment. Remember this feeling. Remember that love is the only thing stronger than time itself. Forever yours, David." The letter slipped from David's hands, and he covered his face with his palms. His shoulders shook slightly, and I realized he was crying. "David," I said softly, reaching for him. "I remember writing this," he whispered through his fingers. "God help me, Evelyn, I remember every word." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the December cold. "That's impossible. You're 28 years old. You weren't even born when this letter was written." "I know," he said, looking up at me with eyes full of confusion and pain. "But I remember the feel of the pen in my hand. I remember the smell of the ocean outside the window. I remember the way you looked when I told you I was leaving." I stared at him, searching his face for any sign that he was playing some elaborate joke, but there was nothing but raw honesty in his expression. The man I thought I knew, the man I was planning to marry, was claiming to remember events from 70 years before his birth. "There's more," Mom said quietly, holding up the remaining letters. "Do you want me to keep reading?" I looked at David, who nodded slowly. Whatever we were dealing with, we needed all the information we could get. The next letter was dated 3 months later, again from Elena to Catherine. "Dearest Catherine, I haven't heard from David since he shipped out. I know you understand the fear that lives in my chest now, the way every knock on the door might bring news I can't bear to hear, but that's not why I'm writing. The dreams are getting more vivid, more detailed. Last night, I dreamed I was at a wedding, my own wedding, but not to the David I know. This David was the same but different, older and younger at the same time. He spoke with a slight accent I'd never heard before, and he knew things about the world that no one alive today could know. I end the dream, we exchanged rings in front of a Christmas tree, and an elderly woman who might have been you was crying happy tears in the front row. When I woke up, I could still feel the weight of the ring on my finger. Catherine, what if the stories our grandmothers told us were true? What if some souls are bound together across time, destined to find each other again and again? What if love really is stronger than death, stronger than the passage of years? I found something today that has me questioning everything I thought I knew about the world. In David's apartment, hidden behind a loose board in the wall, I discovered a bundle of letters in my own handwriting, but discussing events I've never lived through, people I've never met. The papers are old, older than I am, but the ink looks fresh. Am I going mad, dear friend? Or am I remembering something that hasn't happened yet? Please write soon. I need your wisdom now more than ever. All my love, Elena. A loose board in the wall, David said suddenly, sitting up straighter. In my apartment, behind the bookshelf in the bedroom, there's a loose board. I stared at him. David, you live in a building that was constructed in 1995, I know, he said, standing up abruptly. But I need to check. Evelyn, I need to go home and check. Check for what? I asked, though I was already reaching for my coat. Whatever madness we were dealing with, I wasn't letting him face it alone. For letters, he said simply. For letters in your handwriting that you've never written. Mom carefully gathered the photographs and remaining letters, placing them back in the manila envelope. I'm coming with you, she said, her voice firm. Whatever this is, we need to understand it together. The drive to David's apartment was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The snow had picked up, creating a white curtain that made the familiar streets look strange and dreamlike. I kept stealing glances at David's profile, searching for any sign of the man I thought I knew, but he seemed like a stranger now, haunted by memories that shouldn't exist. David's apartment building was a modern structure in the downtown area, all glass and steel and contemporary design. We rode the elevator to the 6th floor in silence, the manila envelope clutched in Mom's hands like a talisman. David's apartment was exactly as I remembered it, neat, minimalist, decorated with clean lines and modern furniture. But now, looking at it through the lens of everything we'd discovered, it felt different somehow. Charged with possibility and dread. The bedroom, David said, leading us down the hallway. His bedroom was simple and uncluttered, dominated by a large bookshelf. Against one wall. David went straight to it, running his hands along the baseboard behind it. Help me move this, he said, and I grabbed one end of the heavy shelf while he took the other. As we shifted it away from the wall, I could see what he was looking for. One of the wooden boards was slightly askew, as if it had been removed and replaced many times. David knelt down and worked his fingers around the edges of the board. It came away easily, revealing a small cavity in the wall. And inside that cavity, wrapped in oilcloth, was another bundle of letters. Oh my God, I whispered, sinking down beside him. David pulled out the bundle with shaking hands. The oilcloth was old, much older than the building itself, and the letters inside were tied with the same faded blue ribbon we'd seen at Mom's house. How is this possible? Mom asked, her voice barely audible. This building is 25 years old. David didn't answer. He was already opening the first letter, and as he read, his face went completely white. What does it say? I asked. He looked up at me, and in his eyes, I saw something that terrified me, recognition. Complete, certain recognition. It's a letter from you, he said quietly. Dated December 20th, 2019. But it's about things that happened in 1943. He handed me the letter, and I recognized my own handwriting immediately, though I had no memory of ever writing these words. My dearest David, if you're reading this, then it's happening again. We found each other across time, just as we always do, just as we always will. I know you're confused. I know you're frightened. I was too, the first time I remembered. But you need to understand, this isn't the first time we've loved each other, and it won't be the last. In 1943, we were Elena and David. Before that, we were other names, other faces, other lives. But always the same souls, always drawn back to each other across the years. You're going to start remembering now. The dreams will become memories, and the memories will become certainties. Don't fight it. Don't let the impossibility of it drive you away from what we have. I found the photographs today, hidden in my grandmother's things. She knew, David. She always knew. She was Catherine, Elena's friend, and she's been watching over us, waiting for us to remember who we really are. The woman you're going to marry isn't just Evelyn Morrison. She's Elena. She's been a dozen other women across a dozen other lifetimes, and she's loved you through all of them. Trust what you feel. Trust what you remember. And know that whatever happens, whatever confusion this brings, our love is real. Our love is the only thing that's always been real. Forever yours, Evelyn. I stared down at my own handwriting, at words I'd never written but somehow knew were true. The impossibility of it should have broken my mind, but instead, it felt like coming home. I remember, I whispered, and as soon as I said the words, the floodgates opened. Memories that weren't mine but were absolutely mine crashed over me like a wave. Standing on a pier in 1943, watching ships disappear into the horizon. The weight of David's arms around me as we danced to Glenn Miller in a crowded USO hall. The taste of tears when he told me he was shipping out. Evelyn, David said, reaching for me, and in his voice I heard the echo of another time, another goodbye. I remember too, he said. All of it. Every lifetime, every meeting, every goodbye. Mom sank down onto David's bed, the manila envelope falling from her nerveless fingers. This is impossible, she said, but there was wonder in her voice instead of denial. No, I said, standing up and pulling David with me. It's not impossible. It's just bigger than we thought possible. I looked at the man I was going to marry, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not just David Chen, software engineer from Portland, but David from 1943, David from lifetimes before that, David who had loved me across time itself. The wedding, I said suddenly. We're supposed to get married in 3 weeks. Are you having second thoughts? He asked, and I could hear the fear in his voice. I thought about everything we'd discovered, everything we'd remembered, everything that made absolutely no sense according to the laws of physics and logic and rational thought. No, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. But I think we need to understand what this means. What we are. What we've always been. David nodded, his hand finding mine and holding tight. Where do we start? I looked down at the bundle of letters, at the photographs scattered around us, at the evidence of something impossible and wonderful and terrifying. We start with the truth, I said. All of it. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Sunlight streamed through David's bedroom windows, illuminating the scattered letters and photographs that had upended our understanding of reality. I woke curled against his chest, momentarily forgetting the impossibility of our situation until I saw the manila envelope on the nightstand. We need help, I said without preamble, sitting up and running my hands through my tangled hair. Professional help. David was already awake, staring at the ceiling with the expression of someone who hadn't slept. What kind of professional helps with reincarnation and time-spanning love affairs? A historian, I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. Someone who specializes in World War II California. If Elena and David really existed, if they lived through what these letters describe, there has to be some record of them. Mom appeared in the doorway holding 3 cups of coffee, looking as disheveled as we felt. I've been thinking the same thing, she said, settling carefully on the edge of the bed. I called Dr. Patricia Reeves this morning. She's a professor at Portland State who specializes in wartime immigration and displacement. She agreed to see us today. You told her about the photographs? David asked, accepting his coffee gratefully. I told her we'd discovered some family documents that raised questions about wartime California, Mom replied diplomatically. She's intrigued. 2 hours later, we sat in Dr. Reeves' cluttered office, surrounded by towers of books, filing cabinets overflowing with documents, and walls covered with historical photographs. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail. These are remarkable, she said, examining our photographs through a magnifying glass. The quality, the composition, the authentic period details. Where exactly did you find them? In my mother's things, I said, sticking to the partial truth we'd agreed upon. She passed away several years ago, and we're just now going through her personal effects. Dr. Reeves nodded, making notes on a yellow legal pad. And you believe these were taken in California in 1943? That's what's written on the back, David said, handing her the group photograph. She examined the notation carefully. The handwriting is period appropriate, and the paper stock is definitely from the 1940s. Tell me, do you know anything about the wartime communities in California? Particularly the displaced persons camps? I exchanged glances with David. Displaced persons camps? Many people don't realize that California housed numerous temporary communities during the war, Dr. Reeves explained, setting down her magnifying glass. Not just the Japanese internment camps, which are better documented, but also settlements for European refugees, workers in defense industries, and others whose lives had been disrupted by the war. She turned to her computer, pulling up what looked like a historical database. There were several such communities along the coast. Some were official government facilities, others were more informal arrangements. Many of the records were lost or destroyed after the war. Why? Mom asked. Various reasons. Some were classified for security purposes. Others were simply considered temporary and not worth preserving. And some? She paused, looking thoughtful. Some involved experimental programs that the government preferred to forget. Experimental programs? David leaned forward. Dr. Reeves hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. There were rumors, never confirmed, of psychological research conducted in some of these communities. Studies on memory, consciousness, the effects of trauma and displacement on human cognition. Most of it was probably standard social science research, but some of the documentation suggests more ambitious goals. She pulled up a map on her screen showing the California coastline dotted with markers. There was one facility in particular, near Mendocino, that has always puzzled historians. It was called the Temporal Research Institute. The blood drained from my face. Temporal? As in time, yes. It was supposedly studying the psychological effects of displacement, how people who had lost everything, including their sense of time and place, might be helped to adapt to new circumstances. But the few surviving documents suggest they were investigating something far more unusual. Dr. Reeves pulled up a scanned document, the text barely legible due to age and poor copying. This is from a letter written by a War Department official in 1944. Listen to this: the subjects at Mendocino continue to report anomalous experiences. Dr. Harrison believes we may have stumbled upon something unprecedented in human consciousness. Research. Several subjects claim memories of events they could not possibly have witnessed, and their accounts show remarkable consistency despite no apparent collusion. David's hand found mine under the table, his fingers ice cold. What happened to the facility? It was closed abruptly in late 1944. All records were classified, all personnel reassigned. The buildings were demolished within a month. It's as if they wanted to erase any trace of what happened there. The people who were there, I asked carefully, what happened to them? That's where the historical record becomes complicated. Dr. Reeves pulled up another document. Most of the subjects were relocated to other facilities or released into the general population. But there are persistent gaps in the documentation. Names that appear in early reports but vanish from later records. People who seem to have simply disappeared from official existence. She turned back to our photographs, studying them with renewed interest. The clothing, the setting, the quality of the photography, these could absolutely have been taken at a facility like Mendocino. And if your relatives were there, it might explain some unusual family stories or anomalies in their personal histories. What kind of anomalies? Mom asked. Memory inconsistencies. Claims of experiences that couldn't be verified. Sometimes subjects reported dreams or visions that seemed more real than their actual memories. A few reported feeling like they'd lived other lives entirely. The room fell silent except for the hum of the heater and the distant sounds of campus life outside. Dr. Reeves continued studying our photographs, occasionally making notes. There's something else, she said finally. I have a colleague, Dr. Sarah Chen, who's been researching what she calls inherited memory phenomena. She's documented cases of people who seem to possess detailed knowledge of historical events they never studied, sometimes spanning multiple generations. David went rigid beside me. Chen? Yes, she's actually retired from the university now, but she still does consulting work. Fascinating woman. She claims her own family has some unusual historical connections. Dr. Reeves looked up at us. Would you like me to arrange a meeting? How old is Dr. Chen? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Oh, she must be in her 80s by now. She was already approaching retirement when I first started here 15 years ago. Brilliant researcher, though some of her theories were considered unconventional. David and I exchanged looks. Another Dr. Chen, the right age, working on inherited memories and unusual historical connections. The coincidences were becoming impossible to ignore. Yes, David said quietly. We'd like to meet her. Dr. Reeves made a note on her pad. I'll contact her this afternoon. In the meantime, I'd like to do some more research on your photographs. Would you be willing to leave them with me for a few days? I can have them digitized and run through some historical databases. Actually, I said, making a quick decision, we'd prefer to hold on to the originals. But we'd be happy to provide you with high-quality scans. Something flickered in Dr. Reeves' eyes, approval, perhaps, or understanding. Of course. Physical artifacts should stay with the family. I'll give you the contact information for a professional scanning service I trust. An hour later, we sat in a nearby coffee shop, each lost in our own thoughts. The meeting with Dr. Reeves had provided more questions than answers, but it had also given us a framework for understanding our situation that didn't involve accepting the impossible. Experimental programs, David said finally. Government research into consciousness and memory. It could explain everything, I agreed. Maybe Elena and David were subjects in some kind of psychological experiment. Maybe whatever was done to them somehow transferred to us. Mom stirred her coffee thoughtfully. But that still doesn't explain how you two look exactly like them. Or how you're both having memories of their experiences. Genetic inheritance of trauma, David suggested. I've read about studies showing that traumatic experiences can actually alter DNA, pass information down to subsequent generations. That's cellular memory, I said. But this feels like more than that. It feels like. I struggled to find the words. Like we actually were them. Maybe we were, Mom said quietly. Maybe reincarnation is real, and maybe some government experiment in the 1940s figured out how to document it. The possibility hung in the air between us, both terrifying and oddly comforting. If reincarnation was real, if souls really did return to find each other across lifetimes, then our love wasn't just 2 years old, it was eternal. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Dr. Reeves gave me your contact information. I understand you've discovered some family documents that raise interesting questions. I'd very much like to meet with you. Are you available this evening? Chen, I showed the message to David and Mom, watching David's face go pale as he read. This evening, he said. That's fast. Maybe she's as curious about us as we are about her, I replied, typing back an acceptance. Dr. Sarah Chen lived in a modest house in the hills east of Portland, surrounded by gardens that even in winter showed signs of careful tending. She answered the door before we could knock, as if she'd been watching for us. She was exactly what I'd expected and nothing like I'd imagined. Small and elegant, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and dark eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge. She moved with the careful grace of someone in their 80s, but her handshake was firm and her gaze sharp. Please, come in, she said, leading us into a living room that felt like a cross between a library and a museum. Every surface was covered with books, artifacts, and photographs. Tea? As she bustled around preparing tea, I studied the photographs covering her mantelpiece. Most were clearly family photos spanning several decades, but others looked older, more formal. And in several of them, I recognized faces that looked startlingly familiar. You're staring at the photographs, Dr. Chen observed, returning with a tea tray. Some of these people look familiar, I said carefully. I imagine they do. She settled into an armchair across from us, studying our faces with undisguised curiosity. You look very much like people I used to know. Dr. Chen, David began, then stopped. This is going to sound insane. Try me, she said with a slight smile. I've been studying the impossible for 40 years. David pulled out the manila envelope and extracted our photographs. Dr. Chen took them with hands that showed only the slightest tremor, examining each one carefully. When she reached the photograph of Elena and David together, she drew in a sharp breath. Where did you find these? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. In my grandmother's things, I said. Catherine Morrison. Dr. Chen looked up at me, and I saw tears in her eyes. Catherine Morrison was my dearest friend. We lived together for 3 years at Riverside Manor before she passed. So you knew about the photographs? I knew she had them. She used to talk about Elena and David sometimes, especially near the end. She said they'd find each other again someday. Dr. Chen set down the photographs carefully. She also said that when they did, I should be ready to tell them the truth. What truth? David asked, though his voice suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Dr. Chen stood up and walked to a cabinet in the corner of the room. From it, she withdrew a thick folder, yellowed with age. The truth about the Temporal Research Institute. The truth about what really happened there. The truth about what you are. She returned to her chair, holding the folder against her chest like a shield. My grandfather worked at Mendocino. He was one of the researchers involved in the project. He kept detailed notes, even after the official records were destroyed. What kind of project? I asked. They called it consciousness continuity research. Dr. Chen said. They were studying people who claimed to remember past lives, trying to determine if such memories were real or fabricated. What they discovered changed everything. She opened the folder, revealing pages of handwritten notes, official documents, and photographs. They found that certain individuals showed evidence of what they termed temporal consciousness, awareness. That spanned multiple lifetimes. And more than that, they discovered these individuals often appeared in pairs or groups, finding each other across incarnations. Soulmates, Mom said softly. More than that. Quantum entangled consciousness, my grandfather called it. Souls so deeply connected that they exist as a single entity across time and space, manifesting in different bodies but maintaining their essential connection. Dr. Chen pulled out a photograph that made my heart stop. It showed a group of researchers standing in front of a building, and among them was an Asian man who looked exactly like David. That's my grandfather, she said. Dr. James Chen. And yes, he looks exactly like your David, just as David looks exactly like the subject he studied most closely. Subject? David asked. A young man who claimed to be experiencing memories from multiple lifetimes. A man who insisted he'd loved the same woman across centuries, always finding her, always losing her, always searching for her again. Dr. Chen smiled sadly. His name was David Chen. He was my grandfather's most documented case, and his most personal failure. Personal failure? I asked. Because my grandfather fell in love with his subject. Not romantically, he was a married man. But he became convinced that David Chen was him, living another lifetime. He began to remember things that David remembered. Began to have dreams of the same woman David described. The room seemed to spin around me. Your grandfather thought he was the reincarnation of his own research subject? He knew he was, Dr. Chen corrected. Just as you know you're Elena and David. The consciousness doesn't care about family lines or genetic inheritance. It finds the forms it needs to continue the connection. She pulled out another document, this one typed on official letterhead. This is my grandfather's final report, submitted 3 days before the facility was closed. In it, he recommended that the research be terminated immediately, not because it was unsuccessful, but because it was too successful. They'd proven that consciousness survives death, that love transcends physical existence, that some connections are literally eternal. What happened to Elena and David? I asked, though I feared the answer. They died, Dr. Chen said simply. Elena from tuberculosis in 1945, David in a training accident just weeks before the war ended. But before they died, they participated in one final experiment. She pulled out a photograph that showed Elena and David standing in what looked like a laboratory, surrounded by equipment I didn't recognize. Both were wearing some kind of headset connected to a large machine. My grandfather believed he could map their connection, document the quantum entanglement of their consciousness. What he discovered was that their bond existed outside of time, outside of physical reality. And more than that, he realized the machine wasn't just observing their connection, it was amplifying it. Amplifying it how? David asked. By ensuring they would find each other again. By creating a kind of beacon across time. Elena and David agreed to the procedure because they knew they were dying, knew the war was separating them. They wanted to guarantee they'd find each other in the next life. Dr. Chen looked at us with eyes full of compassion and sorrow. You're not just reincarnated souls finding each other by chance. You're the result of the most successful consciousness experiment in human history. Elena and David made sure you would find each other, just as they've been finding each other for lifetimes before that. The silence that followed was profound. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, and I could hear the wind picking up. Inside, we sat with the weight of revelation, of impossible truth made real. The wedding, I said finally. Our wedding in 3 weeks. What does this mean for us? Dr. Chen smiled, and for the first time that evening, it was a purely happy expression. It means you're getting married for the fourth time that I can document, and probably not the last. It means your love has survived death, war, separation, and the boundaries of time itself. She reached into the folder one more time and pulled out a single photograph. It showed a wedding ceremony, clearly from the 1940s, with Elena in a simple white dress and David in his military uniform. They were surrounded by friends and family, and in the front row sat a young Asian woman who looked exactly like Dr. Chen. I was there, she said softly. In my previous incarnation, I was Elena's friend Rose. I've been documenting your love story across lifetimes, keeping the records, making sure the truth survives. She handed me the wedding photograph. This time, I get to watch from a different perspective. This time, I get to be the one who tells you the truth before you forget it again. We forget? David asked. Usually. The memories fade over time, become dreams, become stories we tell ourselves. But not this time. Dr. Chen's eyes sparkled with something that might have been mischief. This time, we're going to make sure you remember everything. The drive home from Dr. Chen's house passed in stunned silence. Snow continued to fall, transforming the familiar Portland streets into something ethereal and otherworldly. I clutched the manila envelope containing our photographs and the additional documents Dr. Chen had given us, including detailed notes from her grandfather's research and copies of official reports that supposedly didn't exist. Pull over, David said suddenly as we approached downtown. What? I asked, but he was already indicating a small park ahead. Please. I need to get out. I need to think. I parked near the entrance to Laurelhurst Park, and we walked in silence along the snow-covered paths. The park was empty except for a few dog walkers in the distance, their figures ghostly in the falling snow. We found a bench overlooking the pond and sat down, neither of us speaking for several minutes. Do you believe her? David asked finally. I considered the question carefully. 3 days ago, I would have said the entire story was impossible, the product of an elderly woman's overactive imagination. But 3 days ago, I hadn't seen photographs of myself from 1943, or read letters in my own handwriting describing events I'd never experienced. Yes, I said simply. I believe her. More than that, I remember her. David turned to look at me, snow catching in his dark hair. What do you mean? Rose, I said, the name feeling familiar on my tongue. Elena's friend. I remember her being at the wedding, remember her crying when David shipped out, remember her holding my hand when the telegram came. The telegram? David's voice was barely audible. Telling me you were dead. The words came from somewhere deep inside me, from a place that remembered grief so profound it had shaped the architecture of my soul. Rose was the one who found me. 3 days later, when I finally stopped screaming. David's face crumpled, and I saw in his expression the echo of that same ancient grief. I remember too, he whispered. I remember dying. Not the moment itself, but the feeling of being torn away from you, of knowing I was breaking a promise. We sat in the falling snow, holding hands and remembering deaths we'd never died, love we'd lived across lifetimes, promises that had somehow transcended the boundaries of mortality itself. The experiment, I said eventually. What Dr. Chen described. Do you think it really worked? Do you think they actually managed to ensure we'd find each other again? I think we're sitting here together, aren't we? David replied. 2 people who statistically should never have met, who found each other in a city of millions, who fell in love at first sight because it wasn't really first sight at all. I thought about the night we'd met, at a charity fundraiser neither of us had particularly wanted to attend. I'd been dragged there by a friend, David by a coworker. We'd ended up standing next to each other at the silent auction, bidding on the same vintage camera. He'd let me win, then asked if I'd like to get coffee and discuss photography. I'd said yes without hesitation, even though I'd never been particularly interested in photography and had only been bidding on the camera because I was bored. We never had a chance, did we? I said, not entirely sure if I was lamenting or celebrating. All of this, our entire relationship, it was predetermined by an experiment conducted 70 years ago. Was it? David asked. Or did Elena and David choose to participate in that experiment because they knew, somehow, that we would exist? That this version of us would need to find each other? It was a question that made my head spin with its implications. You're talking about predestination versus free will across multiple lifetimes. I'm talking about love, David said simply. Love that's so strong it bends the rules of reality. My phone buzzed with a text message. I pulled it out, expecting something mundane, but instead saw a message from an unknown number. There are others. Meet us tomorrow at noon. Pioneer Courthouse Square. Look for the red umbrella. Come alone, both of you. A friend, I showed the message to David, watching his face go pale in the lamplight. Others, he said. Other subjects from the experiment? I guessed. Other people like us? Or other researchers, David said grimly. Other people who know about what we are and what we represent. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the December cold. You think we might be in danger? I think we represent proof that consciousness survives death, that love transcends physical reality, and that the government conducted successful experiments in manipulating the fundamental nature of human existence, David replied. If that's not worth killing for, I don't know what is. We spent the rest of the evening researching everything we could find about the Temporal Research Institute, consciousness transfer experiments, and government research into reincarnation. Most of what we found was speculation, conspiracy theories, and academic papers that danced around the edges of what Dr. Chen had told us without ever stating it directly, but buried in a declassified CIA document from 1957, I found a single paragraph. That made my blood run cold. Project Echo subjects continue to demonstrate anomalous consciousness patterns consistent with the Mendocino research. Recommend immediate termination of all surviving subjects and destruction of remaining documentation to prevent national security implications. Project Echo, I said, showing David the document. Do you think that's what they called the continuation of the Temporal Research Institute? Probably, David said, reading over my shoulder. And look at the date. 1957, that's 13 years after the original facility was closed. Immediate termination of all surviving subjects, I repeated. David, what if we're not the first incarnation to rediscover the truth? What if every time Elena and David are reborn and figure out who they are, someone tries to stop them? David's face had gone pale. That would explain why the memories usually fade. It's not natural forgetting, it's forced amnesia. Or worse. I said, the horrible possibility taking shape in my mind. What if it's not amnesia at all? What if every time we remember, every time we find each other and try to be together, they kill us and force us to start over in new bodies? The implications of that possibility were staggering. If I was right, then David and I weren't just soulmates destined to find each other across lifetimes, we were prisoners in an endless cycle of death and rebirth, murdered again and again to prevent us from exposing the truth about consciousness and the survival of the soul. The text message, David said suddenly. What if it's not from friends? What if it's from whoever has been hunting us across lifetimes? I stared at my phone, rereading the message. Pioneer Courthouse Square at noon. Very public, very visible. Perfect place for an accident, David said grimly. Or an assassination. Disguised as a random act of violence. Or perfect place to meet other people like us, I countered, though I wasn't entirely convinced. People who've discovered the same truth we have. We argued about it for the rest of the evening, David insisting it was too dangerous, me arguing that we needed answers more than we needed safety. Eventually, we compromised. We would go to the meeting, but we'd bring backup the next morning. I called Mom and Dr. Chen, explaining the situation and asking them to be nearby during the meeting. If something happened to us, if we disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances, at least someone would know the truth. Are you sure about this? Mom asked as we prepared to leave for downtown. No, I admitted. But I'm sure we can't spend the rest of our lives wondering. If someone is hunting us, if there really is a conspiracy to keep us apart, then we need to know. And if there are others like us, if we're not alone in this, then we need to find them. Pioneer Courthouse Square was crowded despite the cold December weather. Holiday shoppers moved between the scattered food carts and street performers, and a small Christmas market had been set up along one side of the square. The scene was festive and normal, which somehow made me more nervous rather than less. There, David said, pointing toward the center of the square. I followed his gaze and saw a woman standing near the fountain, holding a red umbrella despite the fact that it wasn't raining. She was perhaps 40 years old, with shoulder-length brown hair and an unremarkable appearance that somehow seemed familiar. As we approached, she looked up and smiled, and I felt a jolt of recognition that went deeper than memory. "You came," she said, and her voice carried the same familiar quality as her face. "I wasn't sure you would." "Who are you?" David asked, positioning himself slightly in front of me. "My name is Sarah Williams," she said. "But you knew me as Margaret in 1892, and as Isabel in 1634, and as Chenley in the lifetime before Elena." The world seemed to tilt around me. "You're like us?" "I'm exactly like you," Sarah said. "Same experiment, same quantum entanglement, same eternal love story. The only difference is that I've been awake for longer." "Awake?" I asked. "Remembering. Understanding. Fighting back." Sarah's eyes hardened. "They've been hunting us for decades, David and Evelyn. Every time we incarnate, every time we find each other, every time we remember the truth, they find us. And they end it." "How many times?" David asked, though his voice suggested he didn't really want to know. "This is the 7th incarnation since the original experiment," Sarah said. "You've been murdered 6 times for the crime of remembering who you are." "And your partner?" I asked, looking around the square. Sarah's face crumpled with grief so profound it made my chest ache in sympathy. "Michael was taken 3 weeks ago. They made it look like a heart attack, but I know what it really was." "They're getting bolder. More direct." "Who are they?" David demanded. "The descendants of the original research team," Sarah explained. "Their children and grandchildren, carrying on the family business of consciousness suppression. They call themselves the Temporal Oversight Committee, and they believe that proof of reincarnation and consciousness survival represents an existential threat to social order." "Dr. Chen's grandfather," I said suddenly. "He was part of the original team." "Is she?" "Sarah Chen is one of the few allies we have," Sarah Williams assured me. "Her grandfather left detailed instructions for his descendants, charged them with protecting the subjects rather than eliminating them. But she's only one person, and they are many." "What do they want?" David asked. "To end the experiment permanently," Sarah replied. "They've been working on a way to sever the quantum entanglement, to trap your consciousness in single lifetimes so you can't remember or reconnect across incarnations. They call it the final solution." "How do you know all this?" I asked. "Because I've been infiltrating them for 3 lifetimes," Sarah said, her smile grim. "Learning their methods, documenting their crimes, gathering evidence. And because Michael was one of them before he remembered who he really was." "One of them?" David's voice was sharp with alarm. "Michael Williams, born into one of the founding families, raised to hunt people like us." Sarah's voice broke slightly. "Until he met me at a coffee shop 6 months ago and remembered that he'd loved me for centuries. He tried to warn the others. Tried to protect us from the inside. That's why they killed him." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "David," I said, turning to him with growing horror. "Your last name? Chen. What if you're not just a descendant of Dr. Chen? What if you're a descendant of someone else from the original team?" David's face went white. "My family. They've always been secretive about our history, always claimed we lost track of our relatives during the war." "Call them," Sarah said urgently. "Right now. Ask them about the Temporal Oversight Committee. Ask them about Project Echo. Ask them why they really moved to Portland." David pulled out his phone with trembling hands, dialing his parents' number. I could hear his mother's voice through the speaker, cheerful and unsuspecting. "Mom," David said, his voice tight with tension. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Have you ever heard of something called the Temporal Oversight Committee?" The silence on the other end of the line was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. When David's mother finally spoke, her voice was entirely different, cold, calculating, utterly without emotion. "Where are you, David?" she asked. "Mom, what? Where are you right now? Don't lie to me." David met my eyes, and I saw my own terror reflected in his expression. "I'm downtown with Evelyn." "Stay exactly where you are," his mother commanded. "Don't move, don't run, don't try to contact anyone. We'll be there in 10 minutes to collect you both." "Collect us?" David's voice cracked. Mom, what are you talking about? You've been compromised, she said, as if she were discussing the weather. The memories have surfaced earlier than expected this time. No matter. We're prepared. For this contingency. The line went dead. David stared at his phone in shock, then looked up at Sarah and me with an expression of absolute devastation. They're coming, he said. My own parents are coming to collect us like we're runaway experiments. Then we run, Sarah said, grabbing my arm. Right now. We have maybe 5 minutes before this place is surrounded. Wait, I said, pulling back. If we run, we're just postponing the inevitable. They found us 6 times before, they'll find us again. What are you suggesting? David asked. I looked around the crowded square, at the holiday shoppers and street performers and normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that their understanding of reality was about to be shattered. I'm suggesting we don't run, I said, pulling out my phone. I'm suggesting we make this public. Right here, right now, in front of hundreds of witnesses. Evelyn, they'll kill us, David protested. They're going to kill us anyway, I replied, opening my camera app and switching to video mode. But this time, maybe we can make sure the truth survives even if we don't. I hit record and turned the camera toward my face, then began to speak. In a clear, carrying voice that drew the attention of nearby shoppers. My name is Evelyn Morrison, and I'm about to be murdered by a secret government organization for the crime of remembering my past lives. Within seconds of beginning my live stream, a crowd had gathered around us. Holiday shoppers stopped mid-stride, drawn by the urgency in my voice and the surreal nature of what I was saying. I could see people pulling out their own phones, some recording, others sharing the stream on social media. 6 lifetimes, I continued, keeping my voice steady despite the terror coursing through me. 6 times we've found each other, fallen in love, remembered who we really are, and been murdered to keep the secret of consciousness survival from becoming public knowledge. Evelyn, what are you doing? David hissed, but Sarah grabbed his arm. She's saving us, Sarah said fiercely. Public exposure is the only thing they can't control. I turned the camera toward David, capturing his face as the reality of our situation crashed over him. This man is David Chen, and his parents are part of an organization called the Temporal Oversight Committee. Right now, they're driving here. To capture us or kill us, because we've remembered that love doesn't end with death. A woman in the crowd gasped audibly. Is this some kind of performance art? I wish it were, I replied, turning the camera back to myself. In approximately 3 minutes, you're going to see either a family reunion or a public execution. I'm betting on execution, because that's what's happened every other time we've tried to tell this story. My phone showed the live stream had over 1,000 viewers and climbing. Comments were flooding in, skepticism, curiosity, some people recognizing us from social media, others demanding proof. But the numbers kept growing, and I knew that was our only hope. Sarah, I said, gesturing for her to move into frame. Tell them about Michael. Sarah stepped forward, her grief transforming into fierce determination. 3 weeks ago, my soulmate Michael Williams died of what the coroner called a massive heart attack. He was 29 years old, in perfect health, and had just finished a marathon the week before. But he'd also just remembered who he really was and tried to protect other experimental subjects from his own family. What kind of experiment? Someone in the crowd called out. Consciousness transfer research, I replied, still recording. In 1943, the U.S. government discovered that some people retain memories and connections across multiple lifetimes. Instead of studying this miraculous proof that the soul survives death, they decided it was too dangerous for public knowledge. David stepped into frame beside me, his face pale but resolved. My family has been part of this cover-up for 3 generations. Right now, my mother is probably coordinating with agents to make our deaths look like an accident or a crime of passion. Anything to prevent the truth from spreading. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people, forming a protective circle around us. I could see some of them live streaming on their own accounts, spreading our story across multiple platforms. Simultaneously. The collective viewer count had to be in the tens of thousands by now. There. Sarah pointed toward the edge of the square. Black SUVs, government plates. I turned the camera toward the vehicles, zooming in to capture the license plates and the faces of the people emerging from them. David's parents looked exactly as I remembered them from family dinners, his mother elegant and composed, his father tall and distinguished. But now I could see something cold and calculating in their expressions that I'd somehow missed before. "Those are David's parents," I announced to the live stream audience. Dr. Linda Chen and Professor Robert Chen, both respected academics and, apparently, consciousness assassins. Evelyn Morrison. David's mother's voice cut through the crowd. Noise like a blade. She was approaching with 4 other people, all dressed in dark clothing and moving with military precision. "Step away from the camera and come with us peacefully." "No," I replied, keeping the phone steady. "I think we'll stay right here with our new friends." The crowd had grown larger and more protective. Someone had called the police, and I could hear sirens in the distance. But I also noticed that several people in the crowd were now filming David's parents and their companions, creating a multi-angle documentation of whatever was about to happen. "David," his father said, his voice carrying a tone of paternal disappointment. "You're making this much more difficult than it needs to be. We can explain everything once you're safe." "Safe?" David's voice cracked with emotion. "You mean once I'm dead? How many times have you explained everything to me before, Dad? How many times have you killed me for remembering that I love her?" "The public doesn't understand the implications," Dr. Chen replied, her professional demeanor never wavering. "Proof of consciousness survival would destabilize every religious, philosophical, and social structure in human civilization. We prevent that catastrophe by murdering people who fall in love across lifetimes," Sarah interjected, stepping forward. "By destroying families, ending lives, and condemning souls to endless cycles of death and separation." One of the agents with David's parents moved his hand toward his jacket, but immediately froze as dozens of phones turned toward him. The crowd had become a living security system, documenting every gesture and expression. "You can't stop this," I said, addressing Dr. Chen directly. "It's already spreading faster than you can contain it. By tonight, millions of people will know about the Temporal Research Institute, about Project Echo, about the systematic murder of consciousness transfer subjects." "Evidence can be discredited," Professor Chen replied. "Stories can be dismissed as hoaxes or mental illness. People want to believe in fairy tales, but they also want to return to their normal lives." "Maybe," David said, pulling out his own phone and joining the live stream. "But they'll have a harder time dismissing this." He opened his camera roll and began displaying the photographs we'd found, Elena and David from 1943, their friends, their wedding, their letters. Each image appeared crystal clear on the stream, and I could see the comment count exploding as viewers screenshot and shared them. "These photographs are 70 years old," David announced. "The people in them are us, living different lives, loving each other across time itself. And every time we remember, every time we try to be together, they kill us to protect a secret that could change the world for the better." Dr. Chen's composed facade finally cracked. "David, you don't understand what you're doing. The research, the control measures, they're necessary. Without them, society would collapse." "Would it?" a voice from the crowd called out. It was an elderly man with kind eyes and a weathered face. "Or would people finally have proof that love is eternal, that death isn't the end, that consciousness is more than brain chemistry?" "Exactly," Sarah said, moving closer to our makeshift broadcasting position. "They're not protecting society from dangerous knowledge. They're protecting their own power from the truth that would set humanity free." The police had arrived, but instead of immediately moving to disperse the crowd, they seemed uncertain about how to proceed. This wasn't a typical public disturbance, and the presence of so many cameras had clearly complicated their response. "Officers," Dr. Chen addressed the police with practiced authority. "These individuals are experiencing a severe psychological break. They need immediate psychiatric intervention." "We need immediate protection," I corrected, keeping my camera trained on the interaction. "These people have been systematically murdering my fiancé and me across multiple lifetimes to prevent us from exposing government consciousness research." I could see the lead officer struggling with the surreal nature of the situation. On one hand, we sounded completely insane. On the other hand, we had documentary evidence, dozens of witnesses, and a live stream with hundreds of thousands of viewers watching his every move. "Ma'am," the officer said to Dr. Chen, Do you have any identification that establishes your authority to take these individuals into custody? As Dr. Chen reached for her credentials, Sarah made a desperate decision. She pulled out a small device that looked like a modified smartphone and pressed several buttons in rapid sequence. "What are you doing?" David asked. "Insurance," Sarah replied grimly. "If something happens to us, if they manage to kill us or discredit us, this device will automatically upload every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence we've collected across multiple lifetimes to news organizations, social media platforms, and government oversight agencies worldwide." "You're bluffing," Professor Chen said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Michael built it before they killed him," Sarah continued. "Dead man switch technology. If my biometrics flatline or if I don't check in every 12 hours, the truth spreads everywhere at once. No more cover-ups, no more selective evidence suppression, no more murdered lovers." The agent who had reached for his weapon earlier was now openly agitated, speaking into a concealed microphone. I could see more vehicles arriving at the edge of the square, and my heart began to race as I realized we were potentially surrounded. "The cavalry's arriving," I announced to the live stream. "More agents, more weapons, more people willing to kill to protect a secret that isn't theirs to keep." But then something unexpected happened. The crowd, which had been largely passive observers, began to organize itself. People formed human chains, creating physical barriers between us and the approaching agents. Others continued filming, ensuring that any violence would be documented from multiple angles. Someone had brought a portable speaker and was amplifying our live stream audio so everyone could hear clearly. "This is what democracy looks like," someone shouted, and the crowd took up the chant. "This is what democracy looks like." David grabbed my free hand, squeezing tight. "Whatever happens," he said, his voice barely audible over the crowd noise, "I want you to know that remembering you, remembering us, has been worth everything." Tears streamed down my face as I looked at him, not just David Chen, software engineer from Portland, but the soul I'd loved across centuries, the man who died in my arms in 1943, the consciousness that had fought through death itself to find me again. "I love you," I said, and the words carried the weight of every lifetime we'd shared. Every version of you, every incarnation, every time we found each other against impossible odds. "I love you too," he replied. "And this time, we're going to break the cycle. This time, our love survives even if we don't." Dr. Chen had finished speaking with the police and was now approaching us with renewed confidence. Behind her, I could see more agents moving through the crowd, trying to establish control of the situation. "Final offer," she said, her voice carrying a mother's false warmth. "Come with us voluntarily, and we'll ensure your deaths are painless. Fight us, and you'll experience the same suffering you've endured 6 times before." "Counteroffer," I replied, turning the camera toward her face. "Confess everything on live stream, provide evidence of your organization's crimes, and maybe the 700,000 people watching this will show you the mercy you've never shown us." 700,000? David's eyes widened out. I showed him the viewer count, which was climbing toward 1 million. Comments were flooding in from around the world, expressions of support, demands for answers, people sharing their own stories of dreams and memories that might be echoes of past lives. "The story's out there now," Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder. "No matter what they do to us, the truth is spreading faster than they can contain it." But Dr. Chen just smiled coldly. "Upload counts can be manipulated. Viewer statistics can be falsified. Social media algorithms can be adjusted. By tomorrow morning, this will be yesterday's conspiracy theory, dismissed and forgotten." "Maybe," I said, making a decision that surprised even me. "But tonight, right now, we're going to give them something they can't manipulate or dismiss." I handed my phone to someone in the crowd, ensuring the live stream would continue even if something happened to me. Then I turned to David, taking his hands in mine. "David Chen," I said, my voice carrying across the square, "will you marry me? Right here, right now, in front of all these witnesses and all these cameras? Will you make this lifetime different from all the others?" David's face transformed with understanding and joy. "Yes," he said, his voice strong and clear. "Evelyn Morrison, I will marry you in this lifetime and every lifetime to come." The crowd erupted in cheers as an elderly man stepped forward. "I'm a retired pastor," he announced. If these young people want to be married, I'm happy to perform the ceremony. As we joined hands in the middle of Pioneer Courthouse Square, surrounded by hundreds of strangers who had become our protectors, I felt something shift in the fabric of reality itself. This wasn't just a wedding, it was an act of rebellion. Against forces that had separated us across lifetimes, a declaration that love truly was stronger than death, and in that moment, as the pastor began to speak the words that would bind us together once again, I saw Dr. Chen's composed facade finally shatter completely. Because she realized what we had figured out, a public wedding, live-streamed to 1 million viewers, created legal and social bonds that would be much harder to simply erase. For the first time in 7 lifetimes, our love was going to leave a permanent mark on the world that even the Temporal Oversight Committee couldn't eliminate. Do you, David, take Evelyn to be your wife, in this life and whatever lives may come? I do, David said, his eyes locked on mine. Forever and always, I do. And do you, Evelyn, take David to be your husband, in this life and whatever lives may come? The words hung in the crisp December air, witnessed by hundreds of strangers who had become our unlikely congregation. I looked into David's eyes and saw not just the man I'd fallen in love with 2 years ago, but the soul I'd recognized across centuries. I do, I said, my voice carrying across the square. Through every lifetime, every incarnation, every impossible reunion, I choose you, always. The retired pastor smiled, his weathered face radiating joy. By the power vested in me by the state of Oregon, and witnessed by this extraordinary gathering of human hearts, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The crowd erupted in cheers that drowned out the approaching sirens and the shouted orders from Dr. Chen's reinforcements. David pulled me close, and as we kissed in the falling snow, I felt something fundamental shift in the universe around us. This time was different. This time, our love had been witnessed by thousands, documented by countless cameras, and legally recognized by the state. When we broke apart, I saw tears streaming down David's face. It's done, he whispered. For the first time in 7 lifetimes? It's actually done. But Dr. Chen wasn't finished. She pushed through the crowd, her professional composure completely shattered. This changes nothing, she snarled. You think a marriage certificate protects you? You think public attention makes you safe? I think, said a new voice from behind her, that you're about to find out just how unsafe your position has become. We turned to see Dr. Sarah Chen approaching, flanked by several people I didn't recognize but who carried themselves with obvious authority. She moved slowly but purposefully through the crowd, her elderly frame somehow commanding absolute attention. Grandmother Sarah, David breathed, and I realized this was the Dr. Chen who had helped us understand our situation, the keeper of her grandfather's research. Hello, David, she said warmly, then turned a glacial stare on his parents. Linda. Robert. I believe we need to have a conversation about family loyalty. You have no authority here, Dr. Chen replied, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Don't I? Dr. Sarah Chen smiled, pulling out a thick folder. This morning, I submitted a comprehensive report to the Senate Intelligence Committee, complete with 75 years of documentation about illegal consciousness research, systematic murder of American citizens, and the theft of government resources for personal gain. She opened the folder, revealing what looked like hundreds of pages of documents, photographs, and official seals. Your grandfather's research notes, Linda. Your father's confession letters, Robert. Financial records showing how your families have profited from selling consciousness suppression technology to foreign governments. DNA evidence linking your organization to 43 suspicious deaths over the past 3 decades. The color drained from both their faces. Around us, the crowd had fallen silent, sensing that we were witnessing something historic. Impossible, Professor Chen stammered. Those records were destroyed. Some were, Dr. Sarah Chen acknowledged. But my grandfather was a thorough man. He kept copies of everything, hidden in locations that took me 40 years to find. And when Michael Williams contacted me 6 months ago, when he told me what his family had done to protect the truth, I knew it was time to act. Sarah Williams stepped forward, her grief transformed into fierce determination. Michael spent his last weeks helping Dr. Chen compile the evidence. He knew they would kill him for it, but he chose to protect the truth instead of his own life. Which brings us to the present moment, Dr. Sarah Chen continued, addressing the agents who had been moving through the crowd. Your operation is blown. Your organization is exposed. Your crimes are documented. And thanks to these young people's courage, the entire world is watching. I looked at my phone, which someone had returned to me. The live stream now had over 2 million viewers, and the story was trending globally on every major social platform. News organizations were already picking up the feed, and I could see professional camera crews arriving at the edges of the square. The final solution, Dr. Chen said, her voice carrying a weight that made everyone lean closer. The plan to permanently sever quantum consciousness entanglement, to trap souls in single lifetimes forever. Did you really think I didn't know about it? How? Dr. Chen whispered. Because I helped design it, Dr. Chen replied calmly. 40 years ago, when I thought preventing reincarnation memory was protecting people from trauma. Before I understood that what I was really doing was denying humanity its greatest gift. She turned to address the crowd and the cameras directly. Ladies and gentlemen, you are witnessing the end of the most successful cover-up in human history. For 75 years, a small group of people has suppressed evidence that consciousness survives death, that love transcends physical existence, that the human soul is immortal. The implications of her words rippled through the crowd like a physical wave. I could see people crying, others pulling out phones to call loved ones, some falling to their knees in wonder or relief. The Temporal Research Institute wasn't just studying consciousness transfer, Dr. Chen continued. It was proving that every major religion and spiritual tradition in human history was essentially correct about the nature of the soul. But instead of sharing this miraculous discovery with the world, a few families decided it was too dangerous for public knowledge. The social disruption, Dr. Chen began, would have been temporary, Dr. Chen cut her off. But the healing, the hope, the transformation of human understanding would have been permanent. Instead, you chose to play God with other people's souls, murdering them again and again to maintain your secret. One of the agents stepped forward, his hand moving toward his weapon, but immediately froze as hundreds of phones turned toward him. The crowd had become a living shield, protecting us with the power of documentation and witness. Stand down. Came a new voice from the edge of the square. A woman in a dark suit was approaching with a team of what looked like federal agents. FBI. This scene is now under federal jurisdiction. Dr. Chen's face went ashen. Agent Rodriguez, what are you doing here? Following up on a very detailed report we received this morning about domestic terrorism, conspiracy to commit murder, and violations of about 30 different federal statutes, Agent Rodriguez replied. Dr. Linda Chen, Dr. Robert Chen, you're under arrest. As handcuffs clicked around the wrists of David's parents, I felt a strange sense of completion. Not justice exactly, but the end of a cycle that had trapped us for lifetimes. What happens now? David asked Dr. Chen as the FBI led his parents away. Now, she said with a smile that carried decades of hope, humanity gets to learn the truth about what it really means to be human. About the eternal nature of love, the survival of consciousness, the reality of the soul. She gestured toward the crowd, toward the cameras, toward the millions of people watching around the world. This moment, this revelation, this courage you've shown, it changes everything. Not overnight, not without difficulty, but fundamentally and permanently. Sarah Williams approached us, her face radiant with something I hadn't seen before, hope. Michael's death wasn't in vain, she said. He always said that someday, someone would be brave enough to make it public, to break the cycle of secrecy and death. What about the others? I asked. The other couples like us, the other experimental subjects? Free, Dr. Chen replied simply. Free to remember, free to love, free to live without fear of assassination for the crime of consciousness. The dead man switch Sarah activated this morning didn't just protect you, it exposed the location and identity of every surviving subject. As the crowd began to disperse and the news crews set up their equipment, David and I found ourselves standing together in the aftermath of the most surreal day of our lives. We were married now, legally and publicly, witnessed by millions and protected by the very exposure that should have destroyed us. So what now? I asked, lacing my fingers through his. What do we do with forever? David smiled, and in his expression I saw echoes of every lifetime we'd shared, every separation we'd endured, every impossible reunion we'd achieved. Now we live, he said simply. Not just this lifetime, but all the lifetimes to come. And, for the first time in 7 incarnations, we get to remember every moment. That evening, as we sat in Dr. Sarah Chen's living room surrounded by the documents and photographs that had started it all, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. 3 days ago, we'd been planning an ordinary wedding. Now we were the face of a revolution in human consciousness. Do you think people will believe it? I asked, watching the news coverage on her television. The reincarnation, the consciousness research, all of it. Some will, Dr. Sarah Chen replied, settling into her armchair with a cup of tea. Others won't. But that's not really the point anymore. What is the point? David asked. The point is that the conversation has started, she said. For the first time in 75 years, humanity is openly discussing the survival of consciousness, the nature of the soul, the possibility that death isn't the end. Whether they believe your specific story or not, that conversation will change everything. She was right. Over the following weeks, as the investigation into the Temporal Oversight Committee expanded and more evidence emerged, the world began to grapple with questions it had been afraid to ask. Scientists published papers on consciousness research that had been suppressed for decades. Philosophers debated the implications of proven reincarnation. Religious leaders struggled to reconcile their teachings with scientific evidence of soul survival, and throughout it all, David and I lived our lives with the full knowledge of who we were and who we had always been. The memories didn't fade. This time, if anything, they grew stronger and clearer with each passing day. We remembered our wedding in 1943, our deaths in that war, the separations and reunions across multiple lifetimes. But we also created new memories, free from the fear of assassination, free to love without looking over our shoulders. On our first anniversary, both the anniversary of our public wedding and our private ceremony the following week, we returned to Pioneer Courthouse Square. A small plaque had been installed near the fountain, reading, "On this spot, December 15, 2024, Evelyn and David Chen proved that love transcends death itself." It's strange, I said, reading the inscription. Being historical figures before we're even 30. It's stranger being married to the same person for over a century, David replied, pulling me close. But I wouldn't change any of it. As snow began to fall once again, as Christmas lights twinkled in the gathering darkness, I thought about all the versions of us that had stood in similar moments across time. Elena and David on their wedding day in 1943, not knowing they would die before the war ended. The previous incarnations who had found each other and lost each other, always hoping, always believing that love would find a way. This time, love had not just found a way, it had changed the world in the process. "Merry Christmas, my love," David whispered against my ear. "Merry Christmas," I replied, and in those simple words was the weight of every celebration we'd shared, every holiday we'd missed, every reunion we'd prayed for across the centuries. This time, we would have them all. This time, forever was truly forever. As we walked home through the snow-covered streets, I felt the presence of all our previous selves, all our future incarnations, all the love that had survived impossible odds to bring us to this moment. The Temporal Oversight Committee was gone, their secrets exposed, their crimes punished. Humanity was beginning to understand the true nature of consciousness and the eternal reality of love, and David and I, after 7 lifetimes of separation and death, finally had what we'd always fought for: time. Endless, beautiful, precious time to love each other without fear, to build a life without the shadow of assassination, to grow old together knowing that even death would not part us again. In the end, the Christmas photographs that started it all weren't just evidence of the past, they were proof that some love stories are too powerful for time, too persistent for death, and too beautiful for even the darkest conspiracies to destroy. We had always found each other. Now, finally, we would never have to lose each other again. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.